Huri noa kia tātou e hui hui mai nei I tēnei rangi ki te whakawhiti kōrero e pāna ki tēnei kaupapa ko te Mauri tēnā tātou katoa. E mihi ana ki a koutou te taumata kōrero, ka timata au ki te rerenga wairua, ki a koutou o Ngatikuri e Sheridan, e mihi ana ki a koe hoa. Heke whakararo ki tērā taone nunui o motatau, Ngāti hine puke puke rau, tēnā koe Matua Kevin. Haere whakararo ki ngā waikoro pupu o Rotorua nui ātia. Nō reira e te aroa, Kelly, e mihi ana ki a koe. Tai atu rā ki te rohe pōtai o Tūhoi. E Teina tūhoi maumau kai, maumau tangata ki te pō e mihi atu ki a koe. Nō reira ki a koutou, kua tai mai ki te whakawhiti kōrero, ki te whakaputa o koutou mōhiotanga, o koutou māramatanga, o koutou mātauranga, tēnā koutou. Huri noa ki a koutou te hunga mātakitaki e are mai nei o koutou taringa, tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome everybody. I opened by acknowledging the atua who are ever present and thanked Matua Kevin for opening our session this morning with a karakia. And I acknowledged our many who have passed on and asked that they go to join their tupuna. I then acknowledged our esteemed panelists here who have come from the top of the North Island, from the territory of Ngatikuri and Te Rerenga Wairua. We have Sheridan Waitai, coming down to the valleys at Motatau, that big town where Matua Kevin of Ngāti Hine resides. Moving further down the country to the bubbling waters of Rotorua, where Kelly's ancestors are from, and then across to Te Rohe Pōtai o Tūhoi, where we find Teina. So very, very grateful that we have such great panelists here to join us, to share their mātauranga generously about Mauri. I'm really excited by this panel because collectively they have thousands and thousands and thousands of years of mātauranga that have been gifted to them by their tupuna, but also that they have been gifted through their engagement with our natural environment. So very excited to have them here. And welcome to all of our attendees who have registered and signed up. We hope that you find this session inspiring and motivating and informing as well. So kia ora everybody, my name is Precious Clark and I am the Chief Executive of Maurea Consulting, and I'm really happy to collaborate with Foundation North to bring a series of Mauri wananga to those who are engaged in the GIFT Golf Innovation Fund Together space. The purpose of GIFT is to improve the Mauri of the Hauraki Golf, and so this session is about deepening your understanding of Mauri by hearing from our esteemed panelists today. So just to let you know how today is going to unfold, I'm going to hand it over to our panelists to each introduce themselves. Following that, I'll just explain how to use this platform. And then after that, I've got some lead-in questions for each of the panelists. Following their responses to each of those lead-in questions, we then have an open floor for the attendees to ask questions. So I'll explain a little later about how you can do that. So without further ado, I'd like to hand the rākau over to Teina to introduce herself to everyone. Kia ora, Teina.
Mōrena rā tātou, nā mihi nui atu ki a tātou. Ko nā ihi me nā wehi, kua wana mai tō tātou whakakau i a tātou tēnei ata, ka nui te rere atu o te aroha o te mihi. Ko tairahi a te maunga, ko ohine mataro te awa, ko ruato ki te papakaina, ko te māhurehure te hapu, ko ngai tū hoi te iwi, ko teina takuinga. Just a very quick greeting to us all. I'm ecstatic to join you all this morning around the topic of Mauri. My day job for the last 30 years has been working from within my Te Urewera-based whānau land trust. And from that foundation, it has been quite a deliberate choice and decision to shift and move inside the environmental space beyond that, from anchoring my feet on the whenua of my ancestral home. So Just in short, again, I'm privileged and honoured to be in this space and look forward to listening, hearing and participating with everyone else.
Tēnā koe Teina. Kelly.
Mauri ora, hei te tuatahi ka tuku ngā mihi ki a i o Matua Kore I tēnei o te rangi a tāhua mā tātou nei. Kia puta mai ngā hua pai ki a tātou nei, he aha tēnei mea te Mauri. Hoi anō ki a koe Matua Kevin. Taku nei te tino mihi ki a koe I tēnei wā, nau I arawhatingia ki te atua nui I te rangi I tēnei wā tōnu. Ka tuku ngā mihi ki aku nei hoa, ka noho noho ki tēnei o te paipai o te Mauri. Ki a koe o tūhoi hoki, he waiwai tūhoi noku nōku, no patu hiuhiu ahau, Ngāti Haka, Ngāti Manawa. Ngari I tipu aki au I ohune mutu. Hoi anō ko tēnei taku nei taha Ngāti whakaue. He pai anō ki te a koe Sheridan, Ngatikuri, te kāti aki te wairua. Nice to see everybody today. And those I know from the gift, I send a great big aroha out to you. I remember meeting a lot of you at a wananga that we did on Mauri at, in the midst of Ngāti Whātua o Rākei a year and a bit ago. So great to see this mahi's continuing on. I actually live in Whangarei right now. I've committed to looking after my boy and raising him up in Taitokoro where his mum's whānau all from Waipaua. So he's a future kaitaki of the forest up there. So it's really pertinent that I actually stay here and commit to him to being whāngai up here. So in saying that, here I am in Whangarei, having a beautiful time, and I do make sure I get out into our ngāhiri up here so I can work out what is this Mauri that we were gifted down, and as appreciated, yeah, we were gifted down this mātauranga, but you've got to walk it. So actually, how do we walk that out? How do we engage that into our life and make meaning of it and enhance our life, and actually through what the atua has given us, make that a product of everyday living. So hopefully we can give you some steps of engagement today. Mauri ora.
Tēnā koe Kelly Sheridan.
Kei te mihi atu kia koutou. Kei te mihi kia koe te Matua Kevin. Ko maunga piko te maunga, ko whitiria rau, ko rehu o ku moana, ko waitanoni tōku wairere, ko rehu rau ko whitiria o ku moana, ko Ngatikuri te kaitiaki o te wahi o te rerenga wairua, ko Ngatikuri ahau, ko Sheridan Waitai tōku ingoa. I'm actually really nervous for some reason. I think it's the computer stuff from this morning. But anyway, my name's Sheridan, and I currently serve my own people, Ngatikuri, and lead a lot of the science and mātauranga work, and also help build our next generation in terms of ensuring that we retain our own mātauranga. And I also am the lead claimant for the Y262 now, and we have 5 generations in that claim, and that's also in union with our trust board. So big mahi, but I think the biggest mahi I have as a mother and as also as a grandmother. So valuing all the time that I have with my mokos, especially this weekend, learning about spiders and how they live and how they roll and what they say and how they talk to us. So yeah, that's who I am, and really privileged to be here to serve. Kia ora.
Tēnā koe Sheridan, and last but certainly not least, Matua Kevin.
Tēnā rā tātou katoa, kauru mai ki roto I tēnei hui e rungi te purangi, tēnā rā koutou. E mihi ana rā ki ngā itua maha ko takātu ki tua te ārai, ai rā taki tēnei hoki rātu kua whetūrangi tia, ko tai atu ki te oki okinga, o tērā te matua hoki Peter Tynan, Jack Tynan, e riro atu te ringa kaho aitua ina nahira, ko tahi tonana kōru mō rātou, ko tainei ki rātou ki te oki okinga ki te wāhi tūturu mō tātou. Te roto I te haukāinga, te tahi o mātou huri hea atu ki te kōpua, te whenua te rau ki ta tāke nei. Nā reira kia koutou te hunga mate, haere, haere, haere. Tēnei te tautoko ki a mihi a koutou katoa ki tātou e pai nei, roto I tō tātou horunga I te rānei. Pega me te mihi o ki te ui whānui hono mai na ki runga i te purangi tēnei haora. Kau ke ku mea kene weni mihi ki aro, engari tino hari kōna te ngākau ki te whakauru mai o kunei whakaaro ki roto i o tātou whiriwhiri i te rāne. Nā reira tēnā rā koutou. Morning all, I'm Kevin Prime. I used to say I'm a farmer from Motatau. I sort of still am, but I spend a lot of my time, most of my time actually away from Motatau and doing mediations all around the country and within the environment court. That's my day job, but I still have my own connections to our own land and still working on it. And I think the biggest legacy you can leave is if you can pass on those aroha ki te taiao to your children who pass it on to theirs and sort of live it and breathe it and do it. And just please hear what you're saying, Kelly, about for your own children, and that, you know, to me that's part of what you try to do if you want to look after the taiao. It's to pass it on so the others can have that same strength and aroha ki te taiao. Kia ora tātou.
Tēnā koe Matua Kevin. So to all of our attendees, you can see why we've asked these people to join us today. The depth of knowledge that is on this webinar is significant. So we really hope that, that you enjoy this. So for our attendees, just to let you know, you have a Q&A function. So if you have questions, feel free to type them out in the questions and answers. And we will try to respond to as many of them as we can within the time that we have. So, you can also raise your hands, and if we do have time, I will allow you to ask your own questions using your own voice. So we'll just see how that goes and see what our time determines. So I'm going to lead straight into the questions now. And Teina, I'd like to start with you. So as a Mātauranga Māori practitioner, can you tell us what is whakapapa, tapu and mana, and how do they relate to Mauri?
Yeah, kia ora mō tēnā. Tuatahi āhua ko te rono o te ngākau i te taimai o tēnā pātai kia hau. Hei āhua tau hau tonu, nā te mea hoki i whakaakona mātou, ia mātou tamariki ana, a kāre mātou e kōrero hia we rā mea. Engari, kai te pai ko te tiro a nā kuia kuraua o mua tēnā te tiro, ne? So I'm just saying very quickly that that's an intriguing and interesting question, but I think it's a critical one that deserves space for speaking. In my earlier days as a young child, it was quite a peculiar, strange, and sometimes a forbidden question to be asked at all. And so the elders and my pakeke often would not be so explicit and overt about raising those questions, but you know, today it's clear that we have to. So in the last probably 2 decades, it's also been really crucial for me as a facilitator of learning with our mokopuna and our community, our hapu and families, clusters of families, individual whānau, that we do actually enter into these conversations quite deliberately. And some of them, although I really enjoy the spontaneity of these conversations and discussions, which in my experience were often initiated by the older women of my family. And not often by the men, which was interesting. And I'm sure there are cases where the men do raise that, but you know, whakapapa speaks loudly to me and my family and my mokopuna as being something that's understood around a set of what I call a set of imperatives. And some of those imperative practices are that whakapapa must be something that has been born time immemorial, and it must act as a transformative agent. It must have a transformative quality. Whakapapa describes a set of responsibilities and obligations. Whakapapa is not unconditional, it's conditional. There are certain sets of conditions surrounding the use of whakapapa and how we might seek whakapapa as a form of alliance. It must be a starting point for alliance, kinship, and our common history together. So I think understanding whakapapa in the first instance is really important. Whakapapa is also the iho. It is the iho of Mauri. So it allows us to never be, inextricably connected to things that are spiritual. And I guess the best Pākehā word I can think of around that is metaphysically. We are metaphysically connected to the spirit, and our physical bodies are inseparable from that dimension. Whakapapa is, according to some of my old people, whakapapa is the only thing, the only item that is described as a taonga. Because without it, Te Ao Māori doesn't exist at all. That would be one position taken by my old people, is that whakapapa actually brings the entire definition to what it is to be Māori, and to express things in a Te Ao Māori space. Where Mauri is concerned, whakapapa, without whakapapa, we are unable to enjoy the preeminence of Mauri. And I think whakapapa, because whakapapa is both something that is spiritually endowed, it's divinely visited upon us, it's divinely gifted, that we begin in Te Ao Māori, one of our foundational beliefs is that we are spirit before we are body. And we continue on to be spirit. And Mauri is an intrinsic and an internal illumination of that. I think when Mauri is intact, we understand that it will begin to illuminate and our bodies become enlightened. And people can physically and visibly identify that. Yeah. Kia ora ta.
Tēnā koe, whae, Teina, that's incredible. A follow-on question from that, Teina, is how might Western scientists embrace these concepts in their work?
Well, my long experience in the interface between Mātauranga Māori or Te Ao Māori concepts, tikanga, practices and values underpinning what we do, and my interface with Western scientists as a scientist is that it has been a very difficult and trying journey for most of them, if not all of them. So the Western scientific world has not done very well in embracing these concepts, and largely because the history of Western science is that all things only simply exist in the realm of physicality. And so when I think you confine and lock yourself into a dimension of physicality only, you have largely, from a Māori point of view, you have largely blocked yourself out from understanding how your ngako functions, how your heart functions, what the condition of your heart is. You have blocked yourself out from what the condition of your spirit is. You have blocked yourself out from allowing and providing, allowing accessibility to understanding something far greater than just the domain of physicality. Western scientists, in my view, and these, they come from all walks of life. They're not just Pākehā at all. That's not been my experience. So they can embrace these things when they have a very strong Te Ao Māori mentors alongside them. Sometimes this is an absolute imperative. It's almost mandatory that this must happen. So there's got to be sufficient support on the other side of the fence. So Māori experts and specialists in these areas must be prepared to partner and to buddy and to mentor. And I hesitate to say non-Māori because some of them are Māori. Right? Māori who are unaware of te ao Māori dimensions, values and principles of engaging with the natural world. And with Māori technical knowledge. I think those are some of the, so just exposure, providing safe passage for those who are unaware, and providing safe passage and being able to co-design with them what that safe passage might look like and what they can deal with. You know, it's no point in trying to provide somebody who is really beginning their journey and their walk along these quite profound concepts, Māori concepts, and expecting to teach them, expect them to teach them content from Te Rangi Tūhaha, for example, when in fact what they simply need to be provided at the outset is understanding how we simply engage with each other and what our ideas of kinship, what that looks like when we come together and we meet with each other. So I think it's a different journey for everybody. There's a diverse number of pathways whereby learners will travel. Exposure, I think, support, kindness along that learning journey.
Tēnā koe, Teina, absolutely. Really salient points there. Turning to you, Sheridan, so some of the things that Teina spoke about, we have a natural affinity to, but it's fair to say that Māori are not homogenous and we have different ways of thinking, and we might share same common principles and narratives. So bearing that in mind, can you share with us how mātauranga of Ngatikuri illuminates this, and share with us your observations about how scientists have struggled with this?
Oh, kia ora. Kia ora, Teina, that was beautiful to listen to. Yeah, I think one thing we're really good at as Ngatikuri is we invite people into our space that share the same principles as us, and that's really important. But we sort of really own, excuse me, own our own meta-narratives and our own creation stories. So often we get people speak on our behalf and talk about papa tuanuku and rangi, and these are all our kinship connections to natural phenomenon, and they're part of our whakapapa. But for Ngatikuri, you know, being mana e te whenua is about owning all the parts of creation stories and our origins. So, you know, Rangi had a few wives and we come off the first wife, Pupuharu e te pū. And from there comes our whole natural makeup of our land and the endemic species that you just will not find anywhere else in Aotearoa. And every single thing has a whakapapa. What we've found is that with scientists, they'll say, oh, it's a biodiverse hotspot and it's a place globally where scientists want to come and research their species. And so first of all, the traditional way of coming is coming and taking and doing science work. And then you also have the generalisation of Māori things, Māori kupu, Māori stories. So for us, the approach for us has been, well, just wait there and we'll let you know when we're ready to invite you to our rohe, and it'll be on these conditions, and you will stay with us, you will live with us, you'll become part of us, and you'll understand from our perspective how we see the world. And then you'll also come not as an individual scientist looking at one thing, you actually have to come as an ecosystem of scientists. So we want to be the best kaitiaki we want to be, and we have our mātauranga and our tikanga will guide us. But the beautiful thing around bringing in those that share the same principles as you is you end up with a whole suite of mātauranga and also evidence-based from a science perspective that you can actually drive different conversations with different groups, but also enable us as kaitiaki to be the best that we can be. And, you know, we've gone as far as creating our own cultural safety protocols. We've overridden the collection processes and everything like that nationally. But in reality, the biggest thing we've been challenged with is the paternalism. So we have a lot of male scientists, and it's been great we've had female scientists and Māori coming through, but there has been this whole perception that, that men lead these conversations and we can only talk to a male on the marae and only the men make decisions. And the beautiful thing for Ngatikuri is that our uncles will always say, pupuri te mano te wahine, and you'll speak for your mother, bub, you know, and they'll line up all the nieces and, you know, like they protect us and guide us, but they know we know because they've fed us that kai. And so that's been a real shift for us in terms of a Western science coming into our space is actually we all work complementary to each other, wahine and tane, and you can't separate that. And just like you can't separate ocean kōrero from land kōrero because it's all contiguous. Yeah. Is that helpful?
Incredibly. Tēnā koe, Sheridan. Kelly, moving to you, you're involved in a global project that allows you to explore the universality of Mauri. Can you share with us your observations there? You're on mute, Cal.
Yeah. Awesome. What a way to start it, Teina. Tēnei te mihi nui ki a koe. That was a real taonga, that the kōrero, and I guess it sets the scene for all of us to be able to wind in our aka or whakaaro into what you've actually presented, which was amazing actually. I'm going to talk about the Universal project that I'm involved with, but first of all I'd just like to talk about some of the things that Teina and Sheridan have touched on, which is the unseen world, and getting somebody to walk those steps beside us when we work in the eco groups or groups that are looking at our environment, to actually get somebody who's not afraid of bringing the unseen world into consciousness. And what I've found with that is when I just speak my truth in that world and just speak what I know comes from our tūpuna, these taonga that are brought down, other things that can't be taken away from us, as Teina described with whakapapa, they're the true taonga. As soon as we start speaking that way, people really engage, because actually it's in the hearts of everybody. Even the scientists that I do talk to sometimes seem to struggle with it a little bit, but then when they come and talk to you individually, they're like, oh, actually I do think about things this way, I just don't know, I don't have a place for it, I don't have a peer group that accepts it. So that's really important, and the reason I'm saying that is that quite a lot of the things that we're trying to deal with when we're I guess reading Mauri or understanding Mauri or applying Mauri is, first of all, how's the Mauri inside of our own system? We've got this whole universe inside of us that is being from Te Ao Māori, from our whakapapa, that we are trying to understand that it's not just my bones and my flesh and my blood. These are gifts that have come down from my tūpuna that have helped to form our bodies that come from the atua. So it's come from the atua down to our tūpuna, our ancestors, and now I'm carrying this responsibility around inside of me. I don't walk around representing myself. I make sure that everything I say will have a place that if I was to stand back on my marae back in Tūno Hopu, that my people there would actually go, okay, we agree with what you're saying, and you're not just making this stuff up. So we have a responsibility. The Mauri, that even this kaupapa has a Mauri. This particular hui right now has a Mauri that kua whakatongia te Mauri e te karakia. When our karakia started, this Mauri will carry on. It's a life force that's inside of it, and this life force has now been handled and nurtured now by Teina and Sheridan so far to carry it on, to actually make to strengthen our argument that we need to engage in te taha wairua pretty much. We need to acknowledge this side of the unseen world. And I don't think that we can really understand what's going on. Let's look at Kauri dieback, for instance. There's an unseen world that's happening inside of this Phytophthora. It's not just a pathogen that's killing off our Kauri. There's an unseen world that's happening in Tangaro at the moment when we're having events that are happening where we just see plastics and rubbish in the ocean, but it's deeper than that. There's an unseen world that's happening at Tangaroa. Tangaroa is using defences that we don't even know about right now to protect and expel out all this pollution. And in fact, who's going to be the ones who receive it all back again is us. So, you know, it's like that thing, don't shut up creek from where your camp is, pretty much. So the project I'm involved with is a group of people in Brazil, in Manaus, which is up in the Amazon, and a group of us here. So it's run by Joseph Michael, who's a photographer, and he's really a spiritual, very spiritual man who's actually capturing the world through trying to look at trees and introduce the wairua that's behind trees into people's consciousness. So he scans the trees, and then he was starting applying artistic principles of like energy flow. Energy flow is happening through the rākau, not just water flow, actually, and states of Mauri as well. And there's a group in Manaus who are doing the same thing. So all the practitioners are very, very self-aware practitioners, as in they know their whole system. They know their body, mind, and spirit. A lot of the practitioners on our side are actually noho puku, noho marae. When I say that, they're meditation practitioners as well, because this whole thing of connecting ourselves from body to spirit is the only way we believe we can actually read Mauri in a genuine way, is if we're walking it out all the time and be able to read our own state of life force inside of us, inside of our group. So it seems something that quite a lot of people bypass. Is okay, I'm going to go out and try and work out what this Mauri thing, what is this? What is this wairua thing? What is this whakapapa thing? But first of all, we really have to explore the taonga that we've been given inside of ourselves. So that's the first step with our group, is meditation, noho puku, and then Joseph's actually scanning these trees in 3 dimensions. So he's going around the tree and he's scanning the root systems with LiDAR, a certain type of camera that can actually go down beneath the roots. So he's bringing them to life, and the first code will actually be presented, I think, in Whenuapai, in one of the aircraft hangars, where he's going to project it into a space where people can actually walk up and use virtual headset to get involved. But when they go in, it's actually going to be a really wairua experience. It's all things that you usually can't see. So this project's happening in Brazil to try and save some of the species of trees, including even the Brazil nut tree, which everyone's heard of, and to understand the whakapapa of this tree as well. Obviously, we're not doing that mahi, that's up to the people over there. So we're basically talking iwi take take to iwi take take, indigenous people talking to indigenous people, with our Joseph's Lebanese. We have a lady from France who's the director, and we have some Kiwi, some Pākehā scientists involved as well. So there's a bit of a hodgepodge of us, but it's actually, I'm looking forward to the indigenous conversations around how we are currently reading the te ao wairua with the life force that's going on. Now in Brazil, they use spirit plants. We don't have that here in Aotearoa. They use things like ayahuasca. They use a lot of plants that they use to get actually deeper into the consciousness of the forest itself. That's what we've got to think about. The wild tapu nui a tāne is actually a consciousness. It's not a thing of a cluster of trees. It's actually it's a huge thought form that exists that the atua gave down there. So it's about how do we engage into the consciousness of the wild tapu nui a tāne, Mauri ora.
Tēnā koe, Kelly. So within that project, how easy was it to talk across cultures around the concept of Mauri?
Okay, so I've got to be pono about this. So far, I haven't had that conversation yet with our practitioners over there. It's something that's leading up. COVID is actually, we were supposed to be there in April in Manaus. So we're going to be, which is when the Amazon floods, and I can't remember, I think it raises up by a crazy like 20 or 30 meters. It's huge. Something crazy like that. I might be out, it might be 10 meters, but whatever it is, or was it just a number? I just went, what? So basically you can float on waka into the middle of the ngahere via the water and get really deep into where these trees are. So these trees are growing underwater for half the year as well. So COVID's kind of stopped us. So at the moment, we're doing our mahi on this side of the fence. If we get to travel again in the future, that'd be great. Otherwise, at the moment, we're trying to work out how do we actually get conversations going. So they haven't quite happened yet because of the language barrier. They don't just speak Portuguese over there. They actually have their own language in Manaus, an indigenous language. So going through the translation of that. But at the moment, we're like, I don't care about that. I'm more about the Mauri itself that will present a way for us to communicate.
Kia ora. Thank you, Kelly. Before I ask Matua Kevin a question, just to let the attendees know that after this we'll be opening it up. So we've got one question in the Q&A, but feel free to start typing away to get your questions asked. So turning to you, Matua Kevin, you're heavily involved in the Resource Management Act space as an environmental commissioner, and it has undergone some amendments recently, so that have an impact on the environmental space. So are you able to share with us what those changes are, and more specifically, how do they impact on Mauri? And you'll need to take your mute off, Matua.
Oops, okay. Kapai, thank you. Oh, first I'd just like to acknowledge the other speakers who'd responded so far, and also say that, you know, those questions are so broad, like each one of the questions are really a topic in themselves. So like I'd have loved to have jumped in on Teina's question and asked questions also to Kelly and Sheridan, you know. So it's just to say that, you know, that's something that we need to be cognizant of. I guess and I'd like to express some of my personal feelings, you know, within the system you're talking about. I'm part of the RMA system, and I would have thought, well, I think I was appointed there as an environment commissioner because of my own background knowledge and experience. The irony is when you're sitting in a case, you can't use your own knowledge. All you can do is use the evidence of people who presented in there. And I often used to say in the retiring room, he's lying through his teeth, you know. and I feel that at times you're not in a position to express your own views and your own knowledge, and yet that's part of the system. But, you know, having said that, I think I was part of as you pointed out, I was part of that resource management system review, the panel. I was on the panel. And this new act, if it does eventuate, one of the better things about it, I think, is that it will give effect to the treaty. That's the wording around the treaty clause, instead of take into account, which is what it says at the moment. Like even I don't know what take into account means. I suppose it means that if you say, yep, we talked with Maori guy down the road, that may be taking it into account. So it's going to be to give effect to the Treaty of Waitangi, you know, those be the new words. And I think what it's going to do is going to deliver cultural and environmental outcomes for Maori. That's the intent. But one of the main things I think Maori have always had was being in the position where they can't afford it. You know, you'd attend all these hui, and you're the only people that aren't getting paid for attending the hui. So one of the recommendations, the strong recommendations, is going to be that iwi and Maori are well resourced to carry out their roles. So I think that's one of the exciting things about it. Other things like all existing treaty settlements, those would continue and be continued to be recognised. You know, whatever settlements you've agreed with the Crown, the different iwi have, those would be recognised. There'd be a stronger position for the recognition of mātauranga Māori within the system. You know, and what I found interesting on that panel, though, that the majority of the people on that panel were very supportive of the Māori contribution, what iwi Māori could contribute to the resource management system. And I personally found that quite exciting. But I think the main test of it is how is it going to translate on the ground when we're actually dealing with the work on the ground. Nā reira kaukau aku nei koro I tuatui tēnā. Tini ana ngā takena, ki te koe pēneke te māta torua te puka puka nei. that is just that's just a report. That's how thick it is. But the hope is to try and have one of the intentions of this current government is that even if there's a change of government, that the recommendations can still carry on. So I'm sort of mildly excited about it, I suppose. I'd still love to see how it's going to translate actually on the ground, because you can have, and I guess my own view is that just walk the talk, do it on your own land, and if you can make it happen on your own land, perhaps others would see and then make it happen on theirs. But I'm really quite excited to hear all the different responses. You know, when you spoke about the Mauri and that, and to me that's a lot more, like I certainly believe in it, and I certainly believe that everything has a Mauri, has a life. You know, a rock has a Mauri, whereas because science has already discovered that when you get right down to the atoms, all the molecules, to everything's alive, it's moving, and even though we talk about inanimate objects and kamutu e whai orangano, and all those things are living. So, you know, I'm excited about this wananga you've got here, Precious, and the people that are contributing it. So I think kia kaha ke manawa nui.
Tēnā koe Matua. I wonder if you're able to share with us when you were growing up how you were taught about the concept of Mauri.
You know, I actually can't remember ever being told what it was, because, you know, it's a lot of the words we use, like kaitiakitanga, and I wondered why. And I think in my adult life, I've come to realize that it was because they actually lived it. It was part of their, it was routine. So I never heard the word kaitiakitanga. They just did it. It was like waking up, having a wash, and waking up, krakia, have a wash, have breakfast, then go to work. You know, you don't have a word for that unless it's routine or something. So we never ever grew up, but you learnt it by getting a hiding if you broke a branch off a tree or something. You know, so you learnt by experience. You know, you got a slap on the ears, or if you just caught eel and just took it to someone. No, you don't do that. You've got to clean it, you've got to dry it, and you have to have it ready to eat, or even cook it when you go and give it to people. You don't, you know, that's the easy part, is catching it. The tikanga part is actually to deliver it, you know. So so in growing up, I don't think I was exposed to a lot of those words, even though it was spoken around me all the time. I don't think I was taught it specifically, but you were taught it instinctively. In, you know, you know, you got a hiding pen, you know, so those sort of things you soon learned things by experience, not by observation, and not by actually being taught like in a classroom sort of atmosphere.
Kia ora Matua. I think there were a lot of heads nodding from the panelists. I think everyone shares that sentiment around not knowing, you know, being told this is what you were learning today, just being a part of your natural upbringing. We've got a few questions that have already been posed, and one of them Teina graciously asked on the thread, but actually I'm going to ask you anyway, Teina, so everyone else can hear. And the question is, to Teina, why didn't the elders allow those questions to be asked in the past?
Well, I think generally because they had such a solid social, economic and political structure 200-300 years ago, that everybody in our particular communities understood their role, their function, and specialised knowledges were the repositories that sat with specific people or groups of people. For example, tohunga, ruanuku and ruahine were specialists in being able to hold onto particular sets of knowledge that were entirely sanctioned by the entire community. One of the reasons why those specialist people held it because they were groomed and nurtured into that particular role from a very young age. They understood the rituals of identifying when the community, or indeed at a physical and spiritual level, were being put at risk. And they understood the rituals by which that risk could be mitigated or counteracted. So they understood the rituals, a set of rituals that from both a physical and more particularly a spiritual point of view, that helped to counteract any endangerment of the community and its natural assets. So I think that's one of the reasons it was confined to a specialist group of people. And we still have those words, so we understand that today as a broader, wider iwi iwi population, that tohunga ruahine ruanuku, te reo rauriki, which were women who were deeply specialized in the world, the multitude of spiritual dimensions around spiritual ritual. Their reo was referred to as te reo rauriki. And I think these specific places contained those specialist people. Also, I think that there was a real fear. I remember my grandmother speaking about the fear of these things becoming ordinary and being rendered into a space of commonality and becoming too common, eh? And I think one of the whakatauki that I remembered from a great elder, of one of our great elders who supported the Tūhoe settlement that I was involved in from a research point of view some 15 years ago, was this. I never forgot this particular thing he said to me, which was, "Ko e tukuna te mātauranga ki te tūtūā." Yeah. So in other words, when there's a certain domain of specialist knowledge, you definitely would not put that in the hands of the inexperienced or the immature, lest your entire community be put at risk. And they are speaking about all those different realms of being put at risk, but the most important one, I would imagine, during that time, and it's still the case today, is being put at risk spiritually.
Kia ora, Teina, that's such an important conversation. I'd like to allow the other panelists to build on that if you so wish. Sheridan, would you like to add anything there?
Just that it, you know, e tautoko ana te kōrero a Teina, ko, you know, Matua, it really resonates, and it feels really good to be in this space. But that whole watered down stuff and generalizing is a real challenge for us. It's a very real challenge. And it's something that we need to really consider ourselves in using kupu and where we apply it, and how it's being translated. Because sometimes it's just lost its kaha. The difference between mātauranga and mōhiotanga, for example, you know, because mātauranga is intergenerational, it is transferable, but there are those that keep and hold and nurture and maintain that depth of knowledge. Yeah, but just a little bit from me as I was listening to Matua around, we lived it. So my grandmother was a classic of early in the morning she'd get up to welcome tamanui te rā. And my cousin and I'm not a morning person, you know, Nanny'd wake us up. And he said to me one morning, "Do you think other nannies do this?" Because we'd all get herded out to the front, you know, "Oh, tamanui te rā's coming, you know, it's going to be an awesome day," and greet everything that was out there, because Nan was a real firm believer in having a relationship with every single taonga, with every part of your whakapapa. And so it's not till now later in life that as cousins we sit around and fully appreciate what Nana gave to us. but it is an absolute everyday and way of living for every generation. Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah. I think that segues really nicely to a question that Rachel Brown has posed, which is, do you think for Pākehā that our children are more connected to nature, i.e. they can communicate with trees and animals, etc., but as these tamariki grow, they're reprogrammed into Pākehā life and become disconnected from these gifts or skills in some way? Pehi o koutou whakaaro. What's your thoughts about that question? Maybe we'll start with you, Kelly.
I was that child. Yep. And it's true. The reason being is as soon as we get taken into cities, we are now dealing with a multitude of dimensions that are, you know, I think the worst thing that happens in a city is actually ambition. I think that there's an ambition that gets set up down in front of all of us, and we try to grasp that. And once we start having this ambition, we actually forget about the environment that's right in front of us. We're always thinking about future kind of tasks and goals. And what we do at school is actually, we do this with kids all the time, is we're trying to make them think about a future thing that they need to attain all the time. And it's very hard for them to engage in what I think Mauri is actually it's not a futuristic principle. It's one of the grounding anchors that keeps us into the moment, because it's a life force that it's got a gravitation to it, you know, gravity that'll pull you straight into it all the time, every time you engage. But if you start walking away from it, that's what I think maybe this Pākehā kind of culture thing we're talking about is actually there's no real Pākehā cultural grounding anchor to keep you in the moment. I think that's one of the things that could possibly be different about Te Ao Māori is we are able to live past, present and future all in one, but we recognize that our moment in time right now is actually the most important moment right now, while learning and we're being informed all the time from these other directions, our past and our future. So as a child, and as I'm seeing the kids around us, I think that they are not really given the opportunity to actually see the treasures right in front of them. So these things, talking about whakapapa, that these are taonga that are given to you. You've got them now. These are yours. You don't need to have these things you need to try and attain later on. So it's a real different change. And what Sheridan's talking about waking up in the morning and greeting the taonga of the sun that rises every morning is these are true ways that we can change our lives, all of us, and to retain, you know, protect your kids from the schooling system that doesn't do that. Protect your children from the world of business that's trying to lure them to become basically little factory workers and working on that line there, and they're going to harm the youth. You know, they want to look after the taiao. That's inside of their hearts. Nurture those things inside our own whānau. And this is what I'm talking about, connecting them to our own concept of mauri within our whānau.
Kia ora, Kelly. Teina, would you like to contribute to that kōrero? You're on mute, Teina.
I've just given myself a 5-minute lecture. Kia ora rā tātou katoa, a tāhua katoa atu nā whakaaro. Mi harora wātau te whakarono atu i nā whakaputa kōrero. Just a couple of things for me is that it matters what kinds of conditions we are now being raised inside communities. We have become more deliberate in the last 3-4 generations to reinsert, to provide conditions where the resurgence of mātauranga Māori, te mōhiotana, te māramatanga o te ao a te Māori, has to be deliberately, number one, resurfaced, and then deliberately transferred and transmitted across to the new generations. We're finding that this has to be more deliberate, which sometimes goes against the grain of my parents, my grandmothers, my great-grandparents' generation, which was not a taken for granted method by which these things were transmitted, but I think it became so consolidated across at least 2 or 3 generations that it needed less words, and it needed less deliberateness. But because we have had interruption in a short period of time, 2, 3 generations, there has been interruption at every generational level. We have been forced into a place where we have to become deliberate teachers of these things. So, you know, something just before I lose the train of thought around this particular item is whakapapa. That whakapapa is one such concept whereby we have become increasingly more deliberate across lots of Maori communities and society and whānau hapu and iwi to teach and to transmit. And the conditions, the societal conditions of Aotearoa New Zealand certainly in the last 30, 40 years has been one that's been fervent and ferocious around raising the culture of settlement, iwi settlements. So iwi settlements have also been things that have either been floated and flanked by legislations like the RMA, the Resource Management Act, for example. But when we have a closer look at the statutory levers, we understand that most of them have been levers for a particular political reason, but they have been levers that have asserted our rights and our entitlements. So we have sat inside a culture of rights and entitlements for the longest time. And so our children have come to understand either subliminally or deliberately, explicitly, that if I am to assert my right and my entitlement, I need not have to fulfill any obligations. So the rights have been moving without the obligations and the responsibilities, which is desperately inherent in the whole concept of whakapapa. Whakapapa is not the assertion of rights first. Whakapapa is the assertion of your responsibilities and your obligations, which gives you a segue into then being able to access your rights and some entitlements. And you know, it's the simple example of that in practice, in tikanga and practice, is on our marae. If you have been away from your marae for 50 years and you expect to go direct to the pai tapu, well, you've got another thing coming. What's likely to happen is the aunties is going to throw a tea towel at you first. And that is the deep and simplistic wisdom inside the dualism of whakapapa, that your responsibilities and obligations must be fulfilled before you access your entitlements.
Kia ora, Teina. Sorry, you carry on?
Yes, and then I think just very, very quickly was Mauri, because, you know, our whole talk is about Mauri, is that, you know, Mauri ora is really, isn't it? Mauri ora is really about spiritual wellness. Because the opposite of it is kahupo, which is spiritual blindness. That is its opposite, is spiritual blindness. So Mauri ora is a spiritual disposition. Absolutely a spiritual disposition. So if it is a spiritual disposition, then it also has inside it intrinsic qualities and values that allow us to either raise our levels of Mauri ora, our shades, our degree, our texture of Mauri ora. And two of those things we take for granted because they're used very easily and sometimes flippantly, and that is ihi and wehi. So ihi should be a practice. Ihi is a practice. It's not just something that we feel. Ihi is our ability to access many experiences of being thrilled by life. We must be thrilled by life. Right? That's ihi. And we know what that feels like when our mokopuna are up on the stage doing haka. We get thrilled by life, and then wehi is our ability to be awed by life. We are awed by life. There are things that take our breath away. And that is wehi. We are awed by it. We sometimes can't see it, and sometimes we can't put our hand on it, but we definitely know it's there. We are awed by it. And then, of course, wana is when these two things come together and we are enamored by life. We fall in love with life. We fall in love with it. And then we sense all of it in culmination, and that is the sense of Mauri. That is a sense of Mauri. Mauri is something that we must sense visibly and almost tangibly with our spirit. Kia ora tātou.
Mind blow, just saying. Tēnā koe whae Teina. I think that links in really nicely to a question that we have from Lisa from Foundation North, and it links into something that you said earlier, Kelly, which is, and so I'll ask you to respond first to this question. We talk about changing hearts and minds often in the GIFT program, but it seems more important to awaken that unseen world in our hearts and minds in the first place. Pehi o koutou whakaaru?
Yeah, there's another question also about noho puku, because so for me, I kind of think they're quite related. So noho puku is one of the ways we can describe a meditative practice, which actually means not partaking of food for that time. It could be for your body, so your body can have a cleanse. Definitely for me, it's not partaking of watching. I don't watch rubbish stuff on TV anymore like I used to, because I actually know that the people who create those things have a certain whakaaro that doesn't actually match with mine. So what I used to watch as entertainment, now I've realized actually all that stuff latches onto us, and we have to consistently do karakia to cleanse ourselves of some of these things. So noho puku is actually it's, let's say it's a overarching kupu that can mean meditation. I prefer noho marae, which is for me, it's where you have clarity up here, you know, your kua mā te rai. But noho puku is part of that practice actually of this. So my own practice is, you know, everyone has to develop their own really. I think it's something that your iho inside of you tells you actually how to keep going, because it's to do with your how you're sitting in the world at the moment. So it's quite hard to get told how to do this practice, but it's really so you can connect. You can connect to this reading of, sorry, what was the question again from, it was around the connecting to the spirit, wasn't it?
It was about refocusing from hearts and minds to awakening the unseen world in our hearts and minds.
Kia ora, yeah. The hearts and minds kind of thing, you know, it can be hijacked sometimes by nationalism. You know, we hear these kind of kupu come out of our leaders and talking about these hearts and minds campaigns. And suddenly it's kind of like what we're talking about with this unseen world stuff, what Teina was talking about, what is, it can be sacred. It's almost like someone writes a beautiful book. You know, it could even be Te Paipira Tapu. Someone writes the Bible, and then someone else decides to make a film about it, and everyone who watches that film suddenly doesn't have access to some of the deeper meanings and the teachings inside of it. Now it's become normalized and it's become watered down. And I think that this thing about hearts and minds is kind of the same, actually. It's actually been watered down. What it really is your own internal practice. They say that the longest journey you can ever take is the journey from the mind to the heart. You know, that can take people 70 years in their life to actually make that journey and really get inside of there. So the noho puku practice, I advocate for that, because it's actually a way of trying to take out the clutter and engage from the heart. And then the mind will actually become, you know, it shouldn't really be the dominant. It shouldn't really be the master. Our mind should actually really be a servant to the heart. And I think Te Ao Māori is really run on that precept. And that's something that those who have lived outside of our own culture, even our own Māori people, really struggle with that. How do we flip that around again, where we're actually running from tēnei mea te ngākau, ngā kari a roto, and reading ihi, wihi, wana, all these things that Teina moved. These are things that actually exist first and foremost through this heart centre. So, yep, I think all the practitioners out here who are the gift recipients, you know, these are things that before we go and get a mātauranga Māori practitioner with us, you know, make sure that these are practices you're looking at for yourself before you look at the taia or te moana and, you know, there's mauteri out there, you're looking at the state of the islands. Look at yourself, because papa tuanuku and us are one. Ko tangaroa, you know, all these different Mauri that exist in all the environments. Yeah, that's what we need to be nurturing. And I agree, we need to look at ourselves first. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Kelly. I think that segues to a really a good question that has been posed by Kim, which is through the GIFT process, what some of the GIFT participants are coming to understand is that there's a heavy burden on tangata whenua for their time and their resource. And with the many treaty settlements that are underway, the response, particularly in a COVID environment that we have for our own whānau to support them, you know, there's many things that are drawing on our time and energy. So what might be some creative ways that GIFT could support projects to engage with mātauranga Māori to support their mahi? So Sheridan, I'd like to ask you that question, and Matua, I'd like you to have a go at responding that too, if you may.
Okay, so before I start, I just wanted to say that people will remember how you made them feel, and when you're engaging in work, like particularly with the GIFT Foundation or us, you know, us as Māori engaging with others, is that it needs to always come from a place of aroha, and that all of these things and all of our creation stories, fundamentally it's all aroha. Yeah. And so through that relationship that you really need to build with individuals and in a collective is the space to create translation and new perspectives, because even our own people don't think Māori, but at a cellular level they are. So they've got a blueprint, and you know, how do you build that bridge to bring them across to the other side? And I've definitely found that even our own people, they want one story, and they want it to be as factual as possible, and they forget that kia nganga kōrero, like the beauty of being together is there's so many stories, so many versions, so many ways of expressing, and they all come from a sense of love, and no one's right and no one's wrong. It just is, you know. Do you know what I mean? So I just wanted to add that to total Kelly. But in terms of capacity and engaging, so yeah, let's just be straight up. Mātauranga is the new buzzword in government, local government, and everybody wants a bit of mātauranga. They all want to tap Māori to get mātauranga inside their science and research projects. The challenge for us is every time someone comes to our door and knocks, we have to understand what the opportunity cost is to us, and how does it benefit us, and how does it build our own capacity and capability, and what is it contributing to for whānau, hapu and iwi, for the aspirations we have for our environment. Not all of us have good filters for that. And it's not to say we don't want to have the relationship with those that are coming. It's about how is that investment going to support us? Because people get more out of us than we get out of them. Yeah. And so any fund, any project, everybody that's coming to the doors wanting mātauranga, they have to factor in what the cost is going to be to have that glue role that works with our people. And they also have to factor, and that's our time, that's our coordination, that's our writing, but ultimately, who owns it? How's it being used? Where's it going? You know, what's the protection mechanisms? So across us all, we all have some different models, and it'd probably be really good to actually be able to share some of that online amongst ourselves. Precious. Yeah.
Yeah, these are some of the questions that many of our GIFT participants are trying to come to understand. So if we were to do that, I know it would be extremely helpful. So maybe we'll get Kim to connect with each of us just to give some of those tips and ideas to help those GIFT participants with that, Sheridan. I think that's a really good idea. So Kim, I'm sure you've heard that. Let's do that following this webinar. Would anyone else like to contribute to that? Matua, have you got anything you'd like to add there?
Yeah, actually, from when I saw Kim's question, I've been thinking about it, and you know, occasionally it's not. Sometimes it's common sense. I wouldn't say it's mātauranga Mauri. I think some of these things are common sense, like say how to improve the Waitemata harbour. The main thing is the sedimentation and nutrients that are going into the sea. Stop those and you're going to stop a lot of what's happening, you know. So, and that's Pākehā knowledge, that's well known, and that's the same as, you know, like I was saying in our upbringing, if you urinate in the water, you get a hiding, you know. So, but you can't give people a hiding these days for doing, you know, for contaminating the harbour and that. But, you know, I was trying to think what can gift fund to address something like discharge of certain contaminants into the harbour, you know, that whether they're coming from factories, whether they're coming from supermarkets, from, you know, even just the roundabout, you know, where all the cars go round and round. That's one of the places where there's higher accumulation of asbestos, and that because from all the braking around, that seeps into and goes into the water system, so goes into the storm water and goes out into. So what do you need? You need a whole lot of gully traps that trap these nutrient, well, you couldn't call them nutrients, you can call them contaminants, but at the end of the day, they're not good for the water and they're not good for water life. So it's how do you address some of those things? So what I'd be more inclined to fund or assist some of those ginger groups that are doing things like planting trees along the waterways and those sort of things. And even that, you're restricted in what you can do. That we could do along waterways in Auckland anyway, because there's not fine, you've got concrete, and concrete is one of the worst things because it has, that's where the water runs off and into the stormwater system and eventually out into the sea. So, so Kim, one of the things I think is if you can fund groups that are actually doing some of the work, you know, the work that, the common sense work to try and stop nutrients getting into the harbour.
Yeah, and we've got some pretty exciting projects from when I was a trust board member at Foundation North and on the gift fund. Certainly the Sustainable Business Network is doing a project that restricts the amount of tyres that are finding their way into the waterway through natural runoff. So I think that's a really great point, Matua. We've got an interesting question here from Hainoame, and just to put this in context, Hainoame, I get a sense is of Tongan heritage, and Tongan heritage being very committed to the monarchy and Christianity as well. So just to provide that context for her question. So the question is Māori a transferable concept, you know, acknowledging that it is inherently Māori and it's tied to te ao Māori, but is it one that can help broken communities to make sense of our own migrated collectivism or cultural capital to become more empowered contributing communities? Who would like to have a go at that fascinating question? Perhaps we'll start with you, Teina.
Yeah, the question alone was mind-blowing.
Yes.
First of all, I'd like e mihi ana ki te pātai, ne? E mihi ana ki te pātai, ki te Mauri o te pātai. I think my father is of Tahitian, Achuan and Mokean extract. And so my understanding of most of the Tūhoi concepts, some of which are some of which are Māori generic and some of which are Tūhoe specific. My understanding is that many of our concepts across our South Pacific cousins are similar and common, and I understand that Mauri is one of them, and that iho is another one. So my father's people know iho as io, or and I understand in other French Polynesian areas of our globe, that's also referred to as ilo, or iho, or io. And Mauri is can also be referred to as Mauri. So I think in terms of that, number one, being omnipresent across many Indigenous cultures, and both human and non-human dimensions. Mauri is not confined to people. Mauri is present, as Matua Kevin mentioned much earlier in our talks. Mauri is omnipresent. It resides at different levels of energy and vibration, and wellness in all things. Matua Kevin said earlier, it resides in a rock, and this is true. It Mauri, I understand from my grandfathers, in particular my grandfathers, largely because they are the ones who have spoken to me about the transfer of Mauri from one toko to another. From a taiaha to another, from passing a taiaha, a koikoi, a patu, a kutiate, those types of taonga. They resident in those things. For us as Maori is a Mauri, and I guess if we're talking about transferability, when that taonga is transferred through the generations, so is that Mauri. Just my kind of short view on that, in terms of some personal experiences about the now, and I have to say that really my experience in being able to hear some of that conversation and those narratives around Mauri really only began happening for me when I came into my mid-30s. So it was not a knowledge that was openly and freely shared until I reached a particular maturity. And as I've come into my early 50s, it is available even when I'm not ready for it. But I think that it's not about age. I think it's about stage of readiness. And everybody, I think it visits upon everybody. It's about each person understanding what Sheridan and Kelly spoke about, the ecosystem within, and its readiness and preparedness to receive. Kia ora tātou.
Tēnā koe, Teina. I'm mindful that we've only got about 5 minutes left, so I'm going to ask a final question, and this question has been posed by Holly. And it's, can anyone share with us good examples where projects have engaged and embedded Te Ao Māori and Māori values and Māori in their work that is of mutual benefit for both sides? Does anyone have any projects that people can come to understand and look into and understand how it was done?
Just quickly mention that I think that for mutual benefit for everybody, for both sides, is actually the heritage status of some of our, with Tūhoe, with the Uriweta, and with, with down in Wanganui as well. some of that's mutual benefit to everybody, and that didn't just take Te Ao Māori taking the steps forward on that. That was actually working with local governance, working with government to get the status of these are now sentient beings. We're seeing actually, as I talked about, te wātapu nui a tāne being a consciousness itself, and our tō tātou ne awa. We just think about our whole system with our veins and our bodies, and we know that Papa Tūnuku has the same systems. There's a likeness, there's a whakapapa there, and now we have our own. Everyone is united in the protection of these taonga. Now that's one example I have that comes to mind.
Kia ora, Kelly. Sheridan, do you have any projects that you could refer people to look at the how? How did they do these projects to make it a success on both sides?
Yeah. So definitely through our biological audits and hosting as haukainga and all our kura scientists from all over the globe to do audits on our land and stock taking, and then comparing those and putting that into our curriculum. That's been really good. So we can share some of that modelling. We've got a bit existing that whānau can access. Yeah.
Awesome. Matua, do you have any to add there that you've observed that have worked well?
Yeah, I have. I was just thinking that I was contracted to set up the Kahui Mauri to advise the one of the national science challenges to do with the biological heritage of the National Science Challenge. And one of the strongest recommendations we made was to have even Māori Pākehā on the governance group, because we're set up to advise the governance group. Well, after some time, that is set up now, and we have equal Māori representation on the governance group now for the Biological Heritage Challenge, and now they've got it direct, and that's having Māori as part of the decision making. To me, that was really important, to have Māori as part of the decision making, rather than be an advisory committee as started off.
Kia ora. And Teina, do you have a project that you'd like to share where you've seen that reflected well?
I think just like Sheridan, I'm a great advocate in your own communities in starting small and starting with checklists and stock takes or audits around, very, very, very elementary steps around understanding what the mana and the mauri, te tapu, te noa of your river is, and being able to sit down and co-jointly design what that checklist or that auditing schedule or template might actually start to look like before you launch yourself onto your river. Let's have a look at the kinds of, let's go sit down and do a design around what indeed we might be looking out for, and is it only observable by your eyes, or how do we insert into a template that says, well, this is what I feel as well. I feel this from my river. This is what I smell along my river. And this is the sense I get when I stand in this particular position of my river. Because that's deeply, deeply Māori technical knowing, which is equally, and sometimes I would posit as sometimes more significant than a Western observable empirical understanding of your river. I support the notion that the dual sets of knowledge are really powerful together, but we must privilege the space where we're understanding what we're monitoring, how we're surveying it, and how we understand that from a Māori ora point of view. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Teina. I'm going to round us off here, and I'm really grateful for our panelists and the information, the mātauranga, the mōhiotanga, the kōrero that you shared with us. I've certainly learnt a lot, and I have been kua puta mai te ihi me te wehi te kōrero. So we're going to finish off. I'm just going to do a round robin and ask you about the reading material, or the material that you might like people to consider as we round this off. So Sheridan, let's start with you.
And in terms of what reading material, Prisha?
Any books or reports or research that you think would be good for people who are watching this to take a read to deepen their understanding?
I think for me it's around looking at the Y262 claim, and also the final submissions, particularly for the Tai Tokerau claimants. That's a really cool insight. Yeah, and then I would also look at maybe Ko Aotearoa Tēnei, which is the Waitangi Tribunal's response, and then also look at Te Pai Tawhiti, which is what the government is putting together in terms of, after 30 years, how they think they're going to address the claim. And the reason why I launched into the Y262 claim is it is a national claim. It belongs to iwi Mauri. It is all about our world. It essentially is just who we are, and the continuation of having to strive to just be Māori, you know, to be recognised as Māori. So yeah, I'd go for gold on those ones.
Kia ora, Sheridan, and I'd certainly endorse them. The Y262 claim is a pivotal claim for Māoridom. It's one that weaves the unseen world and the tangible world together. Many claims do, but this one really focuses on that. So tēnā koe. Matua Kevin, what reading material would you recommend to our attendees?
Actually, just reflecting on what Sheridan said, is what I'd rather people did is, on reading that Y262, what do you think we could do to make things happen to address the issues that have been articulated in that report? I think it's an awesome report. You know, I mentioned this report earlier on. It's over 500 pages. I certainly don't recommend you read the lot, but it's good. Probably about the first 100 pages or so, I think, and that's where the Treaty of Waitangi stuff is. But there's lots of other publications, you know, there's lots of those Treaty of Waitangi reports. I think if you read them, Te Roro one, that Y8, you know, the ones around the Manukau Harbour, and there's lots of other claims in, especially around the Auckland area, just about every area that had treaty settlements. You know, I'd certainly recommend reading those, but I mean, it'll take you ages, and if you can get a free copy, the matter is they're very expensive if you wanted to buy them. I've got free copies from people who are surplus to their requirements, and other than that, you can get some online. So I endorse what Sheridan said.
Kia ora, Matua, can you just share with us what the name of that report is that you've got in your hand?
It's called New Directions for Resource Management in New Zealand.
Ka pai. Thank you.
It came out just last month, I think it was.
Awesome. And for those who are listening, you can go to the Waitangi Tribunal website and yeah, the reports there. Teina, how would you like to respond to the question?
Oh yes, just very in a very short way. That I think Sheridan and Papa Kevin have highlighted probably the principal sources and repositories of the information that's critical. You know, if people had a little bit of money to be able to pay for a researcher who is able to collate and summarize some of the key information in those reports, because there's much of it, you know, it's voluminous. That would be really ideal. And just to add to those, so I completely support those readings. Just to add to that, because I constantly promote myself as a gardener rather than a scientist. So my science, Māori, inverted commas, Māori science knowledge really came from the gardens with the nannies. That I would also support that people, there's been a couple of new publications, Te Hua Parakore publication by Jessica Hutchings and Te One Ora, which is a recent publication out. They are fantastic. It's a fantastic kaleidoscope of Marakai proponents from right around the country, including way up north, and they speak and give this elaborate description of Mauri mana tapu te noa I roto I te Marakai. That's wonderful. And in addition to those, I think something that's been one of my favourite undertakings in the last 5 years has been the ability to take our women back to read the whakairo on their whare. Kia ora.
Tēnā koe, Teina. Thank you for that. So just for our attendees who don't know, the reading of the whakairo on the whare is to be able to read the carvings on your ancestral homes. Finally, that question to you, Kelly, reading for our attendees to consider.
Just thinking about myself, there's some good stuff in there. We're going to get a list.
Yeah, I actually will run back to you and send it out. Yeah.
Yeah, ka pai. I really advocate reading, you know, what has been actually laid down here from our own places. If you go into the public library and you know, you can't see you, but put your hand up if you've gone into the public library and walked into the Mauri section, and there's a lot of great resources that are in there. And just use your heart to choose a book that you think might suit the kaupapa. Sometimes it can even be in the title, just attract you. You know, have a look through that stuff there. I go in the library sometimes, just take photos on my phone of pages that I think just sang out to me, and the rest of the book was a bit, you know. But there's some great pages in there, you know. So go and go farm the public library. It's all there. But I would like to suggest something outside of the circle. It's a book called Braiding Sweetgrass. Sweetgrass is one of the sacred 4 plants that some of the people in our brothers and sisters in North America read, and that's by Robin Wall Kimura. This particular book, Robin Wall Kimura is actually a scientist who, she's from Potawatomi people, I think from Oklahoma. She actually was from outside of her culture. She grew up in the Western science modalities and actually realized that through her own iho, through her own whakapapa links, she started to realize that she's having tensions with inside of that Western science paradigm, and realized what was that, and was her own whakapapa was starting to come out inside of her, and realized the way that she'd been raised is actually was to read Māori, nature, everything around her in her own indigenous way. So Braiding Sweetgrass is quite an amazing book. And another book I recommend is outside of the circle, was actually an anthropologist called Jeremy Narby, who wrote a book called The Cosmic Serpent. And Jeremy Narby was one of those anthropologists who kind of jumped on the first waves of people, you know, just like how Mātauranga Māori, everyone's jumping on that right now. There was a thing with ayahuasca, this is a plant. He jumped on that and went and learned some really deep things about the forest through the actual people, not necessarily through the taking of the plant, but actually through the people who took him through the experience, and changed his whole way of thinking, actually. Another one is Monica Gugliani, who's I'll send a link to this one. I think her book is called Thus Spoke the Plant. Anyway, she's a scientist as well who started to actually have a personal relationship with the plant she was working with, and they started talking to her, and yeah, she changed their whole practice. It flipped everything upside down, and I would say that these people have been indigenized by Papa Tuanuku, and that's my whakaaro around what an indigenous person is. Someone who's been indigenized by their whakapapa to the earth. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Kelly. So for our attendees, we'll collate those recommendations and send them out to you so that you can take a read if you're so interested. Thank you, everyone. This brings us to the end of our webinar. We've got a beautiful comment here from Richard Howard, which is the amazing best conversation in Aotearoa today. Thank you very much, Richard, for those kind words. And at this juncture, I'd really like to thank our panelists who have just really shared some deep insights and some great kōrero with us today. So ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa. E kore e mimiti te ngā mihi mana hau kia koutou katoa. So thank you, everybody. We hope that you enjoyed that. I sure did, so I'm sure you did as well. And at this time, I'd like to invite Kelly to close us with a karakia. You're on mute, e hua.
everybody who's been out there has participated in with this wananga that we've had here. We can't see you by face. We really appreciate you giving your time to us and giving us a platform, I guess, to bring what is some of our taonga from Te Ao Mauri and to learn from each other on this panel. So thank you for making this happen. Kam atu ki te kaupapa nei, e tū nei, kia pai mai te Mauri, kia ora tonu te Mauri o tēnei o ngā kaupapa, kia whakaora anō ki a tātou nei, ko ngā iwi, ngā hapu, ngā iwi katoa Aotearoa, arā ko te ao whānui. Hua anō, kia tau te mau ngā rongo ki a tātou te ira tangata. Kia chaki tātou i ngā taonga, i tiku iho mai, mā ngā tūpuna a kui mā o koroma. Kia chaki hoki tātou i ngā taonga, te kite aro nui arā ko te aroha o te tangata, tētihi ki tētihi. Kia chaki hoki koutou rā, te hunga tāmoka arā ko ngā kuia, ngā kaumātu hainatia te tiriti o Waitangi. Kia au te mōhiotanga, kia au te ora, kia tīna, haumi e, hui e, tai.
Ai ki e.
Ai ki e. Tēnā koutou, kia whaitō koutou rā, kia haumari tātou. Kia ora.
Mauri ora.